Welcome, I'm Varsha from Vivaldi, and we are going to be in conversation with Philip and Bernhard, the co-CEOs of the Manjaro Linux distribution. We also have Ruari from Vivaldi Browser, who leads the QA quality assurance team. The reason we are here together is that the Vivaldi Browser is now the default browser on the Arch-based Linux distribution Manjaro on its Cinnamon edition. This edition works really well with Vivaldi's functionality and design philosophy. So let's get into the details on our collaboration and how we ended up working together. And you'll also find a lot of more stuff beyond Linux. Let's go.
What is behind this distribution? I think that's much more important to know how this all came about. The first question is for everybody, and the fact is that you all can talk. I'm just going to put in some questions in between to get the conversation going. I know Ruari is a very, very crazy fan of Linux, and he himself uses Linux, and he can talk about what distribution, what distro does he use, and then we can ask Bernhard and Philip, no guesses, they use Manjaro, but were there any other distros which they used to use before Manjaro? So that is my first question. Ruari, you can start.
Okay. So I've gone through a lot of distributions like many Linux users. I've tried all the big ones. Nowadays, I tend to run Slackware, which is a bit unusual, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because let's focus on Manjaro. But what I will say is that my distro of choice prior to that was Arch, which Manjaro is based, and I used that for 2 or 3 years. And the things I kind of liked in common with them, and it's also true of Manjaro, is a lot of it's very like vanilla Linux, right? I think what Manjaro has done, which is really nice, is that they've made it easier to install. Arch is notoriously hard, and so is Slackware, and they've made it easier to install. But underneath is like a very pure form of Linux. And I also like the packaging, again, of both of them. The Arch packaging system is so simple to kind of tweak and make your own packages or adjust packages. Those are the things that I really love. So, I mean, nowadays, not just because of this collaboration, but because of my old experience with Arch, it's actually a distro that I do honestly, outside of this, recommend to new users, because I think what the Manjaro guys have done is they're kind of like, for me, the like, if you think of Ubuntu and Debian, what Ubuntu and Canonical did well is they just made Debian more accessible. And that is exactly what Manjaro has done. So yeah. So I'm a big fan. I do recommend it to others, but I do actually use Slackware. That's me.
Bernhard? Manjaro now, but what was
definitely.
your choice before?
No, my roots, and it's probably why I was attracted to this like Ruari called it, like a basic or a deep Linux experience. Why I was attracted to this so much is because my roots are actually in Atari. So that's what I was starting off with. So I was kind of used to living under the hood of an operating system. And then, of course, with professional use, mostly in the music business, I was using Windows for a long time. But then I got more and more intrigued by Linux, and I was investigating different options. And so I was a little bit ambiguous between being really brave and doing the hardcore stuff and being on the safe side. So I tried Ubuntu first, being a little bit shy in the beginning. And then with my hardware, it just wouldn't really work well. And I was hitting the limits pretty quickly with a new laptop and so. And then I just jumped into Manjaro because I heard a lot of positive things about it at the time. It was quite a few years ago. It was, I think, 7 or 8 years ago already. So it was still more of an exciting experience, likely than it is nowadays, because since it has been a lot more polished and it's a lot more easier to use and harder to break than it was back then. But then I started using Manjaro, and as a matter of fact, I had some issues in the beginning, and I had to fix them, and I broke my system, and I fixed it again, and so I got to really know it very well on a basic level. and I've stayed with Manjaro ever since. And then a little bit later, got more and more involved, also with development and fixing stuff also internally, and that's where it all started for me.
You know, I just want to comment here because I think you kind of touched on some of it there as well. And I tried to when I was answering the question, but I think it's that thing. It's very easy to dive deep into a distribution like Manjaro or Arch or Slackware. You know, as you say, you can get into the nitty gritty. And I think whilst you guys have a lot of polish, what I like about these kind of distributions is like they're simple. And I don't mean that from like, because Slackware you wouldn't think is simple, or even maybe Arch, but I mean simple from like an engineering perspective. From like people already know, and I'm going to mention it now, that I'm a unicyclist, right? And a unicycle is simpler than a bike. That doesn't mean it's harder or easy. I'm talking about engineeringly simple. And I think that's one thing I love about these kind of distros. I mean, you have the nice polish on Manjaro, but underneath it's a very pure kind of system. There's a lot of great documentation, a fantastic community. You can get to the like nuts and bolts of things. And when something breaks, it feels like you can fix it. Whereas some of the other distros, they kind of get in your way too much, right? They kind of they want to simplify things from a UI perspective, but they maybe get a bit too messy, and then things are messing around for you. So I mean, I just wanted to say that is definitely, that kind of gets to the core of why I like these kind of distros.
Yeah.
I think it's really the point that I also like so much. It's more that the mechanical feel of anything you use, as opposed to something over assisted and electronically, like with a car, for example. If you're really involved and you do stuff manually and it clicks and rattles and you change gears manually, and that's what I really love. And also that even if it's just little things, if I have the possibility to change stuff that I just want to tweak a little bit differently. And I think this is also where we have a deep connection also with Vivaldi, because it's with the browser, I have the same feeling. And that's also why I liked it so much from the start, that you can interact with it, that you can change stuff, that it's not everything is predefined and pre-decided for you. That's what I really like about anything I have in my life.
Philip, so what was Manjaro your first choice, or what was your first distro, and why did you move to Linux, or it has always been your preference? Like, how did you choose Linux and Manjaro?
Well, it was more or less a long time to get there. So when I was in school, my father has a computer shop, and he told me, hey, here are the computer parts. Build yourself, and there's some disks. There's Windows 11. There is 3.11, not 11. 11 is now. And all the things. Even I started with MS-DOS. So there were some old games I was used to play, like Indiana Jones, Monkey Island, and other things. So it's really also have the voodoo cards from 3DFX and so on, Resident Evil 1, and so it's like old games. And so so I did all the Windows Road, 3.11, then Windows 95, 98, 2000, XP, and Windows 7. During the time, I was also learning English, so I was really bad in English at that time, and I had to figure out how to get my English better. So there was either books or movies. So I went to the rental store and got a lot of DVDs, but I said, hey, this is a problem. I have so many DVDs and I cannot watch them. And if I get 5 DVDs and bring them back in 1 hour, then I only have to pay €1. So I did that and stored them on a computer. And the next problem was DVDs back then were really expensive, and the double layers as well. So I had to find out a solution to get those into a single layer DVD, and I started to code. And the language I used back then was more or less Delphi from Borland, so Delphi 6. It's like a Pascal now, and there I started to code. And this was then the application called AutoCue. And I needed to have a nickname, so didn't know what to do. So I used the Bible, pulled it up, and then looked for any word, and then it was Amnon, and my birth year was 82. So Amnon 82 was then the coder of this AutoQ application. And yeah, it's took along, and in school time and so on, I was always coding and so, and my mother was shouting, "Eat the dinner is ready, come down," and then I was still coding, and then suddenly the power was off, and I said, okay, now I have to think about backups and other things as well. And in the end, Windows is a little bit complex, and then I started, okay, there must be something else like Linux or so, and then I got into the bookstores and found SUSE, and Ubuntu was also there, and Madriver. So all those old classic Linux I tried out. Switched between KDE and GNOME back then. GNOME 2 was really great from the user's perspective and the usability. So I looked at which was the baddest not known Linux distribution without any installer, and I found Paldo. Paldo is from Switzerland. It was maintained by two maintainers, Jörg and Raphael. So joined them and created them their graphical installer. This was then ported to Vale, and from then I looked, okay, what is a different desktop? GNOME 2 is okay, but there's also this KDE, and I went over to KDE Mod. KDE Mod is then merged to Chakra, and Chakra Linux, I was then doing the package builds and so on. So this was the get-go to get into Pacman and the Arch-based versions. And in KDE Mod, we always had this issue to cat and mouse game with Arch. If they had a library, then we had to update our packages. KDE Mod was simplified. The KDE back then was big tarball. So you got all the games, all the Office and so on in a single package. So if you only want to install like the Kate editor, you couldn't do that. So KDE Mod was the solution to split those packages. And over the time, KDE adopted that as well. And yeah, we had this base Linux distribution with the solid kernel and the latest KDE packages on top, which is the Chakra back then. And then Roland Singer announced an Arch installer called Manjaro, and I was interested and wanted to see how that goes. And I figured out that he is actually living 2 towns away, and I said, hey, let's meet in person. And then we had some good times, drank coffee and tea, and from there it started to make it properly. I said, let's shut it down for 1 year, do it right, and come out with something great. And so Manjaro was born, and we had 1 year to get it properly done. And after that, it continues. And now we are 10 years in the business.
Okay, so 10 years. So because, recently, I do follow, some social media channels and KDE and Ubuntu and all, because my profession demands to follow these Twitter handles or, what other distros are doing. I mean, of course, I'm in PR and communications, so I just need to be a bit updated about things. So they are really celebrating their 10 years anniversary, 15 years. I think KDE had some celebration. Ubuntu had probably 2 days ago or something. And you just answered my next question, that how old is Manjaro? And you just said 10 years. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, we officially started it to do at 2011, and now it's 2021, so it's 10 years exactly. 10
years. Congratulations on that. I also noticed Bernhard said I was into music, some job was you doing? Like, what exactly were you doing, Bernhard? Like you were
I used to be a singer, actually.
Ah.
Yeah, so I'm still doing different stuff, but my education was first with music composition, and then singing opera and stuff. And I was touring Europe and the world, so to say, for quite a lot of years.
God.
And then this is very interesting. I sorry to interrupt you, but we have a couple of singers in Vivaldi, and at least one who does opera, one of our Icelandic guys. So, I mean, I feel like at some point, if you're touring around, you need to get over here. We need to pair you up with one of our guys.
Yeah,
Yes,
well, we should do a
absolutely.
Vivaldi concert then, and probably sing Vivaldi.
Oh, this is going to be amazing.
Even better.
Yeah, I'm taking notes, guys. I'm actually taking notes that what we
Yeah,
could
I
do
did a
more
lot of
together.
Baroque music, so also Vivaldi. So opera and Vivaldi, Ruari.
It's perfect. Absolutely perfect.
In fact, they say Linux guys are very creative and they tweak and tune their software, try to make their own stuff all the time. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to make music as well as give a platform for people to use their distros. Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think what one connection maybe is if one is the creative part and the tweaking part, and also that you're used to constantly learning, right? It's not that you take something for granted. It's always you create something, you produce it, you refine it, and then it's for upcoming Saturday or so, and then next week you do something completely new. It's like it's always in movement, it's always changing, you always adapt, and I think that's maybe what makes your life easier in an environment like this, if you're used to that.
I think Vivaldi also has a similar philosophy of adapting to the users and letting them do what they want to do with their browsing and with their browser. The other thing is, now that you've picked up this topic, and I would like to continue with it, is this, that we spoke about operating systems, that, okay, you tried Windows, Philip, and you were not really satisfied. Then your father asked you to build your own systems and, get going with things. And that's how you explored, and you finally made a choice to Linux. What do you think? It's a little serious question, but it is definitely people who'll be watching us, they'll be probably wanting to know this, that what is the most pressing issue that facing the operating systems today, What do you think? Because the fact is that a lot of Windows users and a lot of Mac users, Linux is a smaller community, but a very powerful community. So what are the pressing issues, of the operating systems today?
Well, one of the issues might be the ads. If you look at Windows 11, which has this start menu, they will advertise you Microsoft Teams and other software they produce. And when they started to did the last development cycle of Windows 11, there was even a crash because one ad of Microsoft Team and own software was simply crashing Microsoft Windows. So it's kind of bad. And other things are on the Mac OS side. It's good to have this environment, but you're closed down. You're not experience everything what your computer can do, and that you can do with Linux. And with Linux, you can run it on a fridge, on a car, on other devices, even ATMs, if they're properly done, can be run Linux. And now if you go to the bank, mostly you see Windows XP, and XP is out of security updates. And I don't understand why banks still have, especially in the Asian areas, Windows XP and so on. I was in Bali, and my friend and I got to the ATMs and get the money out, and I was on this machine and he was on the other one. And then after we left the shop, a technician came in and got a USB stick and got all the data out. Next day, his bank called and said, hey, there was an attempt in 3 different banks to get your money out of it. And I said, okay, this is what happens if you don't have a secure operating system. And yeah, it's always like one operating system, which is old, and adding new stuff. And if you look at Linux, you can compile it new and only for a specific thing. And that's fascinating, and also a burden if you have to choose which operating system you want to use.
Yeah, to touch on that, I think the customizability thing is like obviously a massive kind of thing that as you say, you can tweak the distro to be exactly what you want. They run Linux on, the joke was always toasters, but literally every device, there probably is a toaster. And definitely. All the way up to supercomputers and phones, whatever. And I think it is really nice. For the desktop side of things, I will comment one thing though, and I think this is super important, and I think it touches to the heart of someone like you guys with Manjaro as well. Linux is a bit special because when you buy a computer, it typically comes with Mac OS, or it comes with Windows, depending on who you buy from, of course, right? So all the Linux users are someone who've gone out of their way to say, okay, I'm going to put something else on, and they've installed it. And this is where I think distros like Manjaro and Ubuntu, to be fair to them, which have simplified the install and optimized the install, it makes it possible for you to run something else. And I think so. It's kind of the key. As I said, I run one distro, but it's not the one that I often recommend. I often recommend a distro like Manjaro. So I think it's really key there. Yeah, so you're doing great work. Perfect work. This is how people get out of the loop and try something else. And to link back to the Vivaldi thing, in terms of what we have in common, most people as well with their browsers, they get their browser from like on Windows, they get Edge. On Mac OS, they get Safari. A lot of the Linux distros give Safari. So I know it's a bit different now with Manjaro, but traditionally that's how it's been. The Vivaldi users are very much the same. There's someone who's kind of opted out and thought, is there anything else different? And then they found us. So there is a parallel for Linux users and Vivaldi users, if you like. They're both types of people who've kind of stepped outside the box to find out what else is there. I think that's kind of fascinating as well. Going a bit off topic now.
It's really fascinating that Microsoft has Edge and Mac has Safari. And Safari is also on the Linux distributions. I think you meant Firefox, right?
I meant Firefox. Yeah. Did I say that? Darn it.
Said Safari. Yeah.
although there is interesting history for it. Most of the Linux users will know this, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, Safari is obviously WebKit, and WebKit comes from KHTML. KHTML comes from Conqueror. Conqueror is from KDE. And if you think about Chromium and Chromium browsers like Vivaldi, they all come from WebKit. So actually everything comes from Linux. You know, we're all browsing today on browsers, you know, even in Microsoft, you know, Edge is based on Chromium. Everything, all the common browsers besides Firefox, actually, they're the one who's a bit outside of this. They all come back to KDE and Linux. So that's kind of fascinating in itself. Just as a side note, I find it amazing. And in fact, the offices where that was developed is just down the road from where I am here.
Yes, we've often spoken about that. Yes.
Yeah, Opera has also had a different engine, so it's just like, but the Opera engine is now lost. So it's only the big two, which is WebKit based, and yeah. So
that's
actually it's a monopoly
story.
at some point if Firefox is all gone.
I know that Jon has this idea. He wants us to get big enough that maybe we could do something a bit different and fork more of it and so on. So, I mean, I think as long as it's not always entirely controlled by Google, and it kind of is to an extent now, but as long as there's a possibility for people to branch out, it's okay. I mean, one of people's worries about browsers nowadays is the lock-in to just, there will only be Chrome or Chromium. But the reality is that all of these browsers have evolved and diverged as companies have got bigger and more successful or been able to do different things. So, you know, it used to be that people said Chrome is just like a clone of Safari, but they don't say that anymore because they split at some point. It became like, you know, Blink and WebKit and so on. So there is possibilities for other manufacturers, be that Vivaldi or Microsoft or someone, to fork more and more and start developing on their own. So there is a worry there in the browser community about having one engine, but I don't think it will end up like that in the long run. I think that there is a way out, and that's the beauty of open source in a way that can be done, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And if you look at the phones, Google Android is now officially spyware. It was tested. There was a study, and Google responded and said, "Hey, that's how phones work." And well, we know from our side that's not the truth. We work closely with Pine 64. We have now worked on bringing up the Pine phone, and now the Pine Phone Pro is around, which has more hardware. So we can see that people are urging for freedom and getting more access on the hardware devices, such as we do with our laptops and mini PCs. We have partnerships with our vendors. There was one fun story with the vendor we had from the UK. It was called Station X. So Eddie wrote us an email, and both me and Bernhard first saw, okay, this is a joke. Someone is having a startup no one knows about. There was in parallel also an email from startups. So both companies came from the UK. In the end, we went for Station X. Bernhard and I wondered how we can make him want to work with us. So we decided we meet up in Salzburg And Bernhard had this great idea. So what was the idea about that with Eddie?
Yeah, no, a friend of mine actually is a youth friend of mine is a pilot at Red Bulls, and so I had the idea of showing him around in the hangar 7 and hangar 8, which is normally not accessible. So it's really great planes and Formula One cars and whatnot, everything that Red Bull owns and tweaks. And so it turned out that Eddie, the guy from the UK with Station X company. He's in fact he was a pilot himself, so it was actually the absolutely perfect get to know meeting. And so we had a great time, and then yeah, that's where we kicked off our hardware collaborations. It was the first project, and we configured their laptops, and it was a fun project. And I guess where it all started also for us to go in this direction with configuring custom desktops for dedicated machines.
Yeah, we went also to London and had a good beer time and all the pubs there. So it was really great. And he had this office in Bletchley Park, where the Enigma was founded and created. So it was great to see how the history of England to World War II Germans were there, and how smart they were, and how it went down, and yeah, a little bit of history and so on. So yeah, really interesting guy and interesting company. And later on, Star Labs kept emailing us, and the third time we said yes, and now we have also them as our customer base. Yeah, a lot of other stories like with Tuxedo and so on we did as well, but we have always direct contacts to our partners.
That's good to know. You mentioned Pine 64. I think, Ruari, you have some liking towards...
I have a Pinebook Pro laptop.
Yeah.
Really nice. Just a cheap device, but works. You know, it's a little bit on the pound, but you can use it as a desktop machine for many things. Super cheap. I mean, the whole ARM thing is very interesting. We do actually have ARM builds of Vivaldi, so some people have used those as well. We don't promote them that much, but I think increasingly we will, because more of us internally have been using ARM. And of course, the guys at Manjaro have been pushing ARM, and the devices they talk about, like the Pine phones and so on, are effectively like Linux machines running on ARM. So, I mean, I know our founder, Jon, is very keen on all types of phones, and particularly open phones and so on. So he's been playing around, as I understand it. So I would hope one day we can get Vivaldi running on there, maybe do another little bit of a partnership with you guys.
Yeah, that'll be wonderful. There's another question which probably I would want to know. And I want to know from you all. It's not an education class, but still, it's nice to know how a distro is built. Good question, bad question, or interesting?
No, it's a fine question. I feel like I could try and give a little bit. It would be stupid for me to do so when you have two guys here who actually build the distro. So I think I'm going to hand over to those guys and let one of them or both of them answer.
Well, if you want to go and start your own distro, there's a handbook called Linux from Scratch, which explains you how to exactly do that. First, you have to have a tool chain. A tool chain is more or less like your box of tools, like your screwdriver, your saw, or nails, or whatever, to put stuff together. And if you have this done, it's like the compiler and the libraries, the base core libraries. If that is done out of the way and you had this started, then you can decide which kernel you want to use, which version, and then put on top the graphics stack like Xorg and all the drivers, or you can go with Wayland. Then you have to decide on the audio stack and so on. It's like Lego bricks. And if you use that guide and follow it to the letter, then in the end, you have this base system, which doesn't have any graphical interface. It's on a terminal base. And if you, in that step, then you can go to the Linux from Scratch extended books, and they explain to you how to power up XFCE, KDE, or GNOME, also in a great way. And if you have done that, then you can think about, okay, how I manage that and which package manager I should use. And if you have done that as well, then you're a Linux guru. And if you don't want to do that, then you can simply use Arch or other Linux distributions, which give you guidance how to install it without doing all the stuff. And then you can decide to make your distro based on an existing one and go from there.
You make it sound so simple, huh? Really simple.
I love his example of Lego bricks, because it's a great visual, and it is like that in a way. I mean, I have played with Linux from scratch for what it's worth, but I never built a distro like you guys. But I do like the concept of that, and I do also like the concept of these distros which start building on someone else, which would be like Manjaro or Ubuntu or others. Because what they always show to me is the same thing, to loop a little bit back to like there's no diversity in browsers, and then because they're all Chromium based. And if you could say, well, there's no diversity a few years ago in new distros because they're all Ubuntu based, but then increasingly they were Arch based. And then even amongst those, they'll say, oh, Manjaro is just Arch. And that could have been an argument early on, but the further they go along and refine it, the less it is, right? So it's just an interesting thing. This is one of the beauties of open source, that you can kind of, the old phrase of building on the shoulders of giants, right? And make something even better. But yeah, I mean, if I was to start a distro, I would probably go down the latter route and leverage the work of someone else and use that as my base. And then it's about tweaking how you do the installer, what kind of packages you want to install, and so on. It's a fascinating thing. But Bernhard, what are your thoughts on?
It's like you have different layers of diversification or of distinction. So it's like having some tools in different countries or in different languages. So you mentioned package management. So you have different package formats depending on which Linux base you're using. So you start from a compiler level, and then once you have built individual packages, you already have like your package format. For example, what connects us with Arch Linux is the Pacman package building, the package builds. And on Debian, they have different ways of building packages, but they use the same compilers. So this is where it starts to branch out. And then these days, many different distributions use package build and Pacman, but it does not mean they are the same distribution. So there's another level of distinction between those distributions, so to say. And then it branches out even to different flavors of Manjaro, or even spin-offs of Manjaro, different editions that use our tools and create something new. So this is yeah, it is like a tree. You can imagine everybody has the same roots, and then a common trunk, and then it branches out to hundreds and thousands of different variations.
Yeah, I think with the distros as well, you find some that are just like a respin or they have slightly different theme or whatever. And your concept of a tree is a great one, because it's like, where do you start? Do you start right near the bottom on one of the lowest branches, or do you start on a branch right in the corner? And some of the distros are literally that. They're changing the theme or something. And you imagine them as a tree. They're starting right out here on the edge, right? And often distros that have started up, I see them. They start and they start with maybe a theme or a small change, and effectively they're moving up the tree because they're basing on something more kind of solid. And their branch becomes bigger, right? And their branch is the one that takes over, or whatever. It's definitely a fan. I love these visuals you see of that, where you see distros and how they interrelate to each other. There are great ones on Wikipedia and elsewhere, and how sometimes it gets messy for the guys who draw this, because they have to draw cross links. You know, when you have a browser, it originally started on one, but then they flipped package manager. An old distro that a lot of people know for that would be SUSE. SUSE was based on Slackware, but it uses RPM, right? So, you know, there's these weird cross links as well over time. That's also nice to see.
Yeah. Okay, coming back to our association. Bernhard, you had mentioned to us earlier, and the people who are watching here would probably want to know that you were very impressed by your Manjaro, your contact, Manjaro's team contact with the developers, which includes Ruari as well, regarding the theming options. That we have the matching default themes for the Manjaro edition, Cinnamon edition. How was your experience, in going about that, and why did you need a default theme? All these things, if you would want to explain.
Yeah, I mean, it is something we have always tried to do, is to, Manjaro has a whole variety of different desktop editions, and our aim was always to have some common graphical theme, so that you would recognize, no matter which desktop you were using, you would recognize the Manjaro characteristics by typical color scheme. So if it's mostly greenish instead of blue, and typical appearances that you would recognize. So for every edition, it was always the challenge to make everything look seamlessly matching together, and at the same time match our product line, so to say. And with browsers especially, it was sometimes difficult to integrate them properly. And what I mean, it was less of a challenge and more of an invitation from Vivaldi, that we suddenly had the ability to really dive deeper and even interfere with the actual source code in the package to make the browser really fit an edition. So that's why, yeah, it was like an open door. So your developers presented to us the possibilities there are in Vivaldi, and for us it was like an invitation we happily accepted. And then we had our graphical department tell us what color codes we need, and then I was discussing with Ruari how best we can integrate it so that these themes are available when you launch it for the first time inside the browser as a theme option. So that was really just something we liked to do. So we were on a common ground there, and it was just very exciting to have this experience with from inside a browser, because this was not something we were used to. So that was just very nice. And it was also an interesting topic that Ruari, you mentioned, was the different user types, the ones who like to tweak everything, and the other ones who just want to switch on something and everything is already set up in a way somebody has decided for them, and they would just go ahead and use it. And we have interesting experiences with making suggestions for a default for an edition for people who actually in the end are going to tweak it anyway. It is very fascinating the way people react, because as you mentioned, Linux is something that you can change everything anyway, and still it is always a heated topic which applications or which look you present from the get-go. So it's really fascinating, because on one hand, it doesn't matter at all because people are going to change it anyway. At the same time, they're really picky about what you offer. So
I
so
find that fascinating as well.
Vivaldi, and on an edition, it was already, again, a heated discussion. Can you do this? Is it the right browser? Is it proprietary, or is it not? Or is it just 5%? Or do we even care? Or it is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. I think, as you say, I think people are not as straightforward as some companies think they are. And I think that you guys, and we appreciate that as well. On the one hand, I'm someone who likes to tweak and tinker and have things my own certain way. On the other hand, exactly as you say, I like a nice default setup, right? I like it to look good out of the box, even if I throw all that away. And that's the realities of actual people. And I think that sometimes gets lost on some of the bigger tech companies. They don't quite see that, but that's the reality. So I can see why it sounds like an oxymoron to like, oh, spend this time making the theme look correct for Vivaldi in Manjaro for users who want to tweak, but it actually does make sense. I can also just talk a little bit about how we did that and something that Vivaldi learned from it. So for those who don't know, Vivaldi Vivaldi's UI is built up almost as like a really complicated web page. It's HTML, JavaScript, JS, and so on for all of our UI elements. This has a lot of advantage to us for rapid development and so on. It has the downside, though. It doesn't pick up like the theming of, say, the distro by default, like many GTK or KDE apps would. So whilst we have a lot of theming capabilities by default, we're not matching the look and style of the Linux distro that's running underneath it. So when we first talked about this, like how are we going to do this, it's about, okay, we need to tweak Vivaldi to match the default that is on Manjaro. And I had to have a think about, like, how would we actually do that? Because I hadn't thought of it from the other perspective before. And I came up with a little hacky way to do it. And Bernhard did it very neatly with my hack. And I think it looks good. But we learned something out of this. And that is that we need to make this better by default for Manjaro in the future, or maybe if another distro wanted to do it as well. And so what we're doing now is we're actually working on some theming stuff. I'm not going to give up too much away because I'll let marketing get onto that later. But basically, it's going to get a lot easier for people like Bernhard to do it in the future. So that's great. And that's a large learning experience from working with Manjaro. So that was really helpful. So basically, in a way, you trying to do it showed me that we effectively have a bug, and we'll fix that bug in the future to make it the theming even better than it is. So and that was actually really useful for us. The one thing I'm wondering about, though, is I feel like I came into this conversation a little late in the game. I feel like I'm stealing Varsha's thunder here, but I'm just going to say it anyway. I would like to know how this thing started. Like, who contacted you? Did we contact you, or did you contact us? How did this thing begin? That's something that I'm still not clear on.
I always thought it was Christian, right?
I think Christian did, yes.
Yeah.
He reached out to you guys, or who did he speak to first? How did that begin?
He wrote an email to us about just very open about any possible collaboration, and it was really not clear where exactly we would go with this contact, and we just had 2 meetings in a pretty short amount of time, and we were just babbling away like we are doing now, and talking about common interests. And so yeah, it was just we were getting to know each other, and then it was actually the question was, would we be interested to present it to our audience, so to say, in our edition as an option, or even, I mean, it was not even about the default or so. And so it was we were introducing the browser to members of our team. We were experimenting with it and getting to know it more and getting to like it also. And then we were just discussing where could we go with this, and it's still not completely clear. I mean, it's just an interesting collaboration. It's just we have a lot of common interests, and it looks like very fruitful also. I mean, Philip, you can tell more about your contact with Jon about the user counter. And so this is a completely new field and another common interest. It's just very exciting and very helpful for both parties, I think.
Yeah, sure. It's always like the first question what we get when we have a business meeting with new clients or potential customers: how many users do you have? How big is Manjaro, and so on? And I never can say, hey, this is the exact number of users we have, this is the exact installation, and so on, because we don't track people, and it might get a problem at some point. Because if you have an investor or you have someone who wants to bring an application to your ecosystem, they want to know how many users you have and how many people using your stuff.
Absolutely. Another thing, coming back to browsers, both of you, we use Vivaldi, of course. We work for Vivaldi, and it's more like we enjoy, like personally, when I joined Vivaldi 6.5 years ago, close to 7 years now, I was hooked on to Chrome. It took me literally 3 months to completely switch to Vivaldi, because there was a learning curve involved, and I was trying to break a habit, and start using another browser. And now I can't live without Vivaldi. Like Vivaldi is there all the time. Like I have to use Vivaldi as my browser because I like the way it is. I also believe in the philosophy of Vivaldi. I also believe in the founder, you know, what he wants to do, and, you know, give a better, cleaner internet, you know. I want to know whether you use Vivaldi or not. I'm sure you must be having your browser choices, but are there any features, you know, which you really like, or you want Vivaldi to add or have? Would love to know about that.
By the way, it's fine if you don't use Vivaldi, because I at the beginning mentioned I didn't use Manjaro. But it's interesting to know, and why, because that allows us to. Yeah, that allows us to adapt, right?
Yeah. Like I'm sure you must have tried Vivaldi, if not use as your default browser. Like we never impose.
No, definitely. I had to try it. I had to test it definitely for the Cinnamon launch. But also I'm using several browsers, and I'm using both Firefox and Vivaldi at the moment. And I'm using Vivaldi specifically for the tiling functionality, because this is something no other browser uses. Because sometimes I need to have one page on one half of the screen and the other to compare something on the other side. So this is really extremely useful. For Firefox, I would always have to split out a window and then move it over there. And so the tiling functionality is something I really love. So for that, I use it with pleasure. And also, I like the notepad, the included notepad, even though it wouldn't be a big deal to open a separate notepad anywhere else or even use a piece of paper. But for some reason, to have it in the same window gives a very nice feeling. So I like that. And also, yeah, I have most of the time I have 2 or even 3 browsers open at the same time, because sometimes there are some pages I need to log into as different users at the same time. So of course, I could run different instances also of the same browser, but then it's also, I like to know different software also. If there are questions and challenges with packaging and stuff, then it's good to know the whereabouts in any application. So my most used browser is probably still Firefox, but I'm at least a part-time user already. I'm probably converting.
Good to know. Really good to know. Yeah, even notes is one of my favorite features. Quickly jot down something while I'm browsing. And the same, like I use web panels a lot, you know, so that's one of my favorite features as well. I can't live without notes actually now. Gosh.
You know what's interesting is I just cut in before Philip answers, just as it's a chance. Those kind of features, we have several of them that don't always like literally make sense, but somehow make sense. Another one, we have a clock in the browser in the bottom corner. You've probably seen it. And I remember when we were discussing having a clock, it's like, what are we doing with the clock? You know, all the operating systems have a clock, but then, you know, sometimes I find it amazingly useful, because like I actually flip between OSs. I work on Mac OS sometimes and Windows, because I have to test all environments. As it happens, don't tell anyone I'm using a Mac right now, but anyway. And the one nice thing about having the clock there, which I think is great, is it's always in the same location. So when I flip between OSs, or I have different window managers, my eyes go to the same spot. Also, on our clock, you can set it down to the second. I know that doesn't seem important, but sometimes I just want to count seconds because of something I'm doing. So it's one of those things. It's a weird one. Like, why do you have a notes thing? Because, you know, there are already notes applications. Why do you have a clock? There are already clocks, but sometimes it works, right?
You know what happened, you know, when you were launching, you know, when you were introducing the clock, you know, so we have a set of features for every product release, you know, and we usually have a lot of features with every product release. And so like we were discussing, and I was talking to Ruari. I said, Ruari, why a clock? You know, why are we having a clock? You know, and users will say, oh God, Vivaldi is a bloat and this, and why do they need a clock? And I'm like, okay, fine. I'm putting it in the press release. I'm putting in the communication, you know, that we are having a clock, and of course the benefits of it. Deep down, I was not convinced about it. And clock was the one which was appreciated by the users.
They loved it. It was weird, but it kind of makes sense. It's a strange thing.
So you learn, you know, as you said, that you keep
Yeah.
learning. So everyone's so different. Everyone's choices are so different, you know. So it was it's really it was amazing to see the feedback on the clock feature, and it works for a lot of people, you know. Philip, now you tell us what
Yes,
do you
I'd love
like
to hear
about
Philip.
Vivaldi?
Tell us how
Whenever
much you love the clock. Tell us about the clock. No, just tell us whatever you like.
Which clock?
Which clock? Well, on my side, I have more or less three browsers there. I have the bad Chrome browser for whatever reason. It was just like if I'm testing and have so much different tools like Skype, Zoom, and other web browser-based communication systems, Big Blue Button, and so on. For whatever reason, they work always best on Chrome, and I didn't had it figured out how to work in other things. I have to test Vivaldi if it works there better. The Vivaldi itself, I also use like the tiling. So if I have to go to GitLab and compare something, then it's even better to have it in one browser instead of having multiple folders and window open there, because it gets really messy if you have to code, and between the stuff you have to switch. If you have it in one window, you can move that to a different desktop and still have it in the same split as you set it up. And also the email client, which is integrated, I'm checking out, which is still in beta phase. So yeah, it's cool things you can see in Vivaldi itself, and you might miss in other browsers. But if you know the developers, then you can say, hey, this cool feature might be interesting. We saw that the community of our side might like to see that. And getting that into a browser like Firefox might take ages. And here we are more practical, as we are both small companies and we are more agile to get those things in. And since Vivaldi is more or less the Lego brick master of browsers, you can change a brick or two.
Those were very nice words, actually. I'm impressed. Thank you. Yeah, but that's what the relationship is all about. If you like something or if you want something in the browser, you can always write to us. And that's the kind of relationship we have with our users. You want something, make a request. We look into it, whether it's possible or not. And we usually do give in to the requests of our users in general. But not a bit of Linux talk, a little bit more than Linux, as Bernhard was a singer, is a singer. I wouldn't say was a singer, but he was into that profession maybe earlier. Rory is madly in love with his unicycle. He's a unicycle enthusiast. Philip, what are you enthusiastic about apart from Linux and Manjaro?
Many things. So I started always into sports. So I'm a rescue swimmer. And so I'm more or less in the town. We have a lake, so I'm always watching on Sundays and so on with friends. And before that, I was in a bath, which is like outside with a pool, and so we started there. Besides that, I started to have not unicycle, but in German called Kunstrad. It's just like you have the special bike and you stand on the saddle, you stand on the steering wheel and so on, or even on the wheels. So just acrobatics on the bike I did. Also, I'm doing judo. I'm even a judo instructor. And besides that, I'm a dance instructor as well. So a lot of things I'm doing.
You forgot the surfing.
Judo.
The surfing I forgot as well. Yeah, okay, river surfing.
This, you know, with the surfing and the surfing and the life saving. Now I just picture as David Hasselhoff. You know, I want to see you in red trunks, like running out.
The Baywatch days. No, but you know, Philip, I've also learned judo in school, but I did not go beyond the yellow belt. Sorry, I was so bad at it. I used to suck at it. Yeah, no, actually, I did go to. I don't remember. It was really years ago.
I have the green belt, so yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we did have judo as a sport, so yeah, some similarity. And I don't use Linux, by the way. I have to give it a shot. I'm still on Windows.
This bike thing you mentioned, I just have to come back. I think I know what you mean. These are fixed wheel bikes used for kind of like almost gymnastic spins and things like this, right?
Yeah, you can go to the back wheel, you can go to the front wheel, you can go backwards.
I've never done this, but now I know what I need to buy.
Yeah,
you can even pedal backwards, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
As it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of my I like the unicycles. I like other bikes as well. I have I don't know how it translates in it, probably something related to high wheel in German. I don't know. It's Veltepetter in Norwegian, or penny farthing in English. It's basically, some people describe it as that old timey bike with the big wheel. I have one of those as well.
Hochrad, I think, in German.
Yeah. Yeah, I have one of those, and also have a scooter. And I'm not talking about an electric scooter. I'm talking about, you know, a kick scooter, or a kick bike, if you like, but with big wheels, with bike wheels, you know.
And the unicycle you're normally talking about, is this a small one?
I have 6 unicycles at the moment.
And different sizes?
Yeah,
different
so the
heights.
biggest one is 36 inches. That is very big. If you think of like big mountain bikes, there's a kind of trends in mountain bikes. A lot of them are 27.5 or 29 inch. So my wheel is 36 inches. So it's very big. That I use for commuting. And then like my penny farthing, which is what I commuted on today, that is 54 inches. I'm sorry about these old British imperial measurements, but
yeah, because both my children are also unicycling, or they used to, because my daughter, she is in a circus. She's training acrobatics in a circus, and they both learned also unicycling. And
I love you guys.
They also went to school on it, and it was like really.
This is so great. I love you guys now with the bike stuff as well. I mean, this is amazing.
Yeah, Rory?
In one of our first meetings, actually, we, you know, when I was first pulled into one of the meetings and spoke to these guys for the first time, we were at the time, it was COVID, very much COVID, I think in all the countries, right? So I was in a cabin at the time. I think Bernhard was as well. We were kind of all working remotely, and it was just a very nice interaction. I thought maybe it was just me, but I remember saying at the time, you know, it would be nice to meet up sometime for a beer, and I would still love to do that. So yeah, if you guys do ever come here, or if I go over, I would love to come and see you guys as well. I also want to check out bikes, unicycles, all those kind of things. We can talk about it as
Lovely.
well.
Yeah, that'd be great, you know. Yeah, and I'm not a very techie person, you know, but talking to you guys, you know, it just doesn't seem, you know, it's only about distros, building this, development, and all bugs and all. It doesn't revolve around that, but it's a bit more than that. So it's fun to carry on the conversations over beers or common hobbies.
I think an interesting thing here as well, we're going a bit off topic, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, there is a perception of Linux users, right, as geeky nerds who sit inside and just code or whatever. And there is some of that. That's fine. And I'm not against that at all. I can see myself in that. But what I think is interesting here is it shows that people are multifaceted. Like browsers or like operating systems, there is always more depth to people. And you look at Philip, he's obviously an outdoors guy. He's a guy into sports and so on. This doesn't fill the stereotype that people have in their head. Bernhard with the music. I just think it's very interesting. And I think that's why as a company also it's very interesting. It's very important to remember that people are, there's more depth to them. Don't try and push them in a box and make for this one box, because you can't fit everyone in a box, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good demonstration of it here when you look at the people.
Yeah. Okay, it's time for some rapid fire. It has to be rapid and it has to be fire. Not too many questions, but we'll make it quick. You guys need to make it quick. Don't think. How much time do you spend online per day, Bernhard?
Too much. 10, 12 hours.
Philip?
6.
That's it. Rory?
Yeah.
I don't believe you.
And that was precise. I don't know, way too much. I work here, I cycle home, then I go online way too much. I should spend more time with my kids and go out and do more cycling, but I don't know, a lot of the day.
I can vouch for Rory. He's always online and yet not contactable.
That's because I'm doing my own thing.
I know. What was your first email ID? Do you recall, Bernhard?
I don't.
No problem. Philip.
Maybe the name of a pet, likely.
Philip?
Yeah,
well,
for me, it's always been my name because my name is kind of unusual. So I was always able to get it. I think I had my first email at university, and I think they just used my name. But for a long time online, when I had something different, I used to use a reference to Star Wars because, geek. And I used to use Grand Moff Tarkin. He was like one of the Death Star guys. I used to use that as an email address somewhere. So some references to that might be me. But then again, everyone loves Star Wars, so they could also be someone else.
well,
Philip,
mine
your
was
turn
the Philly. The Philly.
now. The Philly.
Da
Okay.
Philly. Okay.
Or
Yeah.
the Clone. The little one.
Mine was Varsha, and then it was like _50 because I wasn't finding the right number, and everyone thought that I was 50 years old at that time. So no, I'm not 50 at all. I had to explain. Anyway, next question. Which operating system does your smartphone have, Bernhard?
Android and Manjaro.
There you go. Rory,
I mean, I think I've shown this before.
show it again.
I don't have a smartphone. Okay, I have several different types of kind of dumb phones, and part of that relates to your previous question about how much you're online. I'm trying to cut myself back. This one is semi-smart. It's KaiOS, which is a variant of Firefox OS that they continued. I don't really like it, but I don't have a smartphone. The last smartphone I had though was an iPhone.
And that you lost.
It was stolen from me, from my hand.
Snatched while
Yeah.
you were unicycling or cycling, I think. Cycling.
No, I was playing Pokemon Go. I was standing playing Pokemon Go at like a specific spot. Some guy came on a bike behind me, reached over, grabbed it, cycled down a hill. I was at the top of a hill, and I at first assumed, this is a friend of mine, or like someone's playing a practical joke. And then I realized, no, someone's stealing my phone. I ran after him down the hill. I chased him on foot for probably 15 minutes. He was cycling quite slow. I don't think he realized I was following him, but it's very hard to keep up with the bike. And then after that, at some point, I'd already been playing with like dumb phones or feature phones again. I thought, maybe this is a sign. So it's actually around that time that I switched to using feature phones again.
Okay, that was not rapid and it was not fire. So to repeat
Sorry.
that, Philip. And that is which operating system does your smartphone have?
Well, I have Manjaro with the Fosh and also Android.
Cool. And get Vivaldi on your Android also, and just test Vivaldi on your Android.
It's already installed.
Oh, cool. Super. Bernhard, question to you. Where do you store your online contacts, photos, and files?
Online, mostly not online. Mostly I have them in several copies locally, and yeah, I try to have redundancy, and so I'm not. My life doesn't stop when my phone drops. So I'm trying to be careful, but I'm also hesitant to store stuff online, except for our code, of course, because it's shared, and so our shared community and business stuff. But my private stuff is mostly just local.
Super. Philip.
Also local, but I have an Hetzner Nextcloud, which I build up and host. So yeah, it's like this. Knowing to have the control of yourself.
Yeah, cool. Ruari?
For me, I mainly have stuff locally as well, again, in multiple locations, a bit like Bernhard. But I do have a shell account that I use, which I keep some stuff on, which I connect to remotely sometimes. And I do have a Dropbox account, which I use for specific things, some photos and so on.
Yeah, I have a Dropbox too. Yeah.
Okay. Email client, Bernhard?
Thunderbird. And yeah, I was after the rapid fire, I can say something else.
No, you can carry on. We can, yeah.
No, it was. I was thinking about this thing with the integration of everything in the browser, right? Because we were occupied with task to shrink down operating system to basically mostly browser-based or mostly just one application for everything. So in this regard, I find it really very intriguing to have like email client, calendar application, notepad, everything inside the browser, and even a clock. So it's like you have almost a complete workstation, right? So it's really an intriguing idea that you could basically have a machine and just launch Vivaldi and work away. So you still need a text editor.
Yeah,
The Vivaldi OS.
Yeah.
It's almost, people ask about that from time to time.
Powered by Manjaro.
Yeah, that's how it would have to be, right? Because you still need the underlying thing. Like building an OS from scratch is so much, but again, it's that concept we talked about earlier of a tree and building. So our trunk, would have to be Manjaro or something, right? That's how we would do it.
Okay, question to you, email client, Philip.
Thunderbird and Kmail.
Okay. Rory, I don't need to ask you that. I know it, but you can still answer.
Well, I might surprise you as well. I use obviously Vivaldi, but sometimes when I need to access, so Vivaldi is interesting because it's a client, and some people would talk about like the web service, like Gmail or whatever is their client, and it can be as well, but it's also the back end. So the back end of my client for my personal email is actually Fastmail. And so sometimes I do use their web interface as well, because if I'm on another person's machine, I don't have Vivaldi to hand or whatever. So I quite like Fastmail as well. I think they do a really nice job. So actually, I'm going to say both. I'm going to say Vivaldi and Fastmail.
Cool. Now, quick questions. Are these ordinary, simple questions, but they are fun to know, fun to answer, and for me to know. Favorite city, Bernhard?
I'm gonna say London.
Okay, Philip?
Saigon.
Ooh, didn't expect that. Rory?
It's a tricky one. I know this is rapid fire, but I'm just going to say two anyway. I love Oslo for certain reasons, and mainly about family and just being outdoors. And it's a small city, you can walk around and so on, and you can go out and cycle in the woods and things like that. I also love London. I lived in London for years, and I like that for other reasons than I like Oslo. It's more diverse in like cuisine and places you can eat, and if you like to go out and see events or things, things happen in London. So I kind of love both, but for different reasons.
Nobody's asking me questions. I'll answer it.
Go for it. Let's hear.
I like Oslo, yes, because now I live here. But my hometown, back in India, Lucknow, my heart is still there. Yeah. And I also like a small town. That was my first town in Europe I'd visited after, like, I'm not including Scandinavia, but Bruges in Belgium. That's a quaint little town, and I love that. Yeah. Okay. Last question, rapid and fire. If not Linux, then what? Bernhard.
I don't know.
Great, that is the answer.
No. I have to use sometimes Windows. Apple, I think I would theoretically prefer more, but I actually never use it, and I don't really know it well. So it's just Linux for me.
Philip?
Texas Instruments calculator system. If you don't use a computer, at least use a calculator.
Rory.
Yeah, I have to use them all as part of my job. I actually hinted here earlier. I'm doing this on a Mac right now. It's tricky. It's tricky between those two. I don't really trust either companies. I like Linux. I like Mac OS for some things, and I like Windows for others. I don't know. I guess I just switch around. But I would miss Linux a lot. That's where my heart is, right? So it's tricky. But I could make do on either Windows or Mac if I had to. If I absolutely had to. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's where the heart is, Linux. And I think this was a fantastic conversation. We touched upon lots of topics and lots of good stuff we spoke about, learned about. Yeah, so I would just say thank you to all three of you. Thanks for your time and just being together and talk about, and also cheers to our collaboration. Hope we do great things together going ahead as well.